Welcome back, everybody. Today I have a special guest on my channel. Her name is Andi, and she is a friend of mine who is going to talk to us today about learning and teaching English. Andi, it's so nice to see you, and please introduce yourself for us.
Well, thank you for having me, Jenna. Hi, guys. My name is Andi, like Jenna said, but most people know me as Andi. I was born and raised in Brazil. So I lived my whole life there. I went to college there. I worked there. But in 2009, I moved to California. When I came here, I didn't speak English very much, but now I teach English at a community college in California.
So, yeah, and actually we are colleagues. We teach at the same school.
Correct.
Yeah, that's how we
got English as a second language at the same college, the same department.
So tell us, what classes are you teaching this semester?
So this semester I'm teaching a beginner low level reading and writing ESL class, English as a second language class. So we focus on reading and writing, but there is a lot of speaking involved too, and listening because the lectures are all live. And I'm also teaching an intermediate high listening and speaking class. And this class prepares students for academic courses that they will take that are non-ESL, that are not in the ESL, English as a second language program, regular college classes.
And does that class involve more than just, what we sort of think as like typical listening and speaking activities, more than just like conversation and improving listening?
Oh, yes, it involves a lot more than just listening and speaking. There is some conversation involved, yes, but there is also, students have to pay attention to lectures and notice clues from lectures. They have to understand what the main idea of the lecture is. So there's lectures, and they also have to, for example, they have to summarize a lecture. So there's some writing involved too, based on what they listened, what they interpreted, what they understood, and then they have to put that on paper. So it's all 4 skills involved, but the focus is on listening and speaking, not so much on reading, more on listening, having a conversation. Sometimes we have debates in class. So yeah, it's really interesting.
That sounds really fun and interesting.
Oh, it is fun.
Yeah. So tell us how you got started teaching English. So English is your second language. How did you make the decision to actually become an English teacher?
That's a good question. So because I had to learn English as an adult, I started learning English almost 2 decades ago. And because I had to do that, I had to go through that process and not only learn a new language, but also learn how to adapt to a new environment, to a new culture. I thought that after a while, after learning English for a while, that I could help people make the same leap, that I could help people also learn English and learn more about the culture. So that when I had to decide I had to make a decision about what master's program I wanted to continue, my studies. So I decided to take, to do TESOL, to do my master's in TESOL, so I could be this person that could help other immigrants in this country. So yeah, but it was a challenge because I didn't think I had enough English skills at the point when I started my master's. I wasn't super confident, but little by little, with a lot of motivation and time, you got to put a lot of time into this. I got there, and yeah, so that was the main reason why I decided to become an English teacher. Other people could benefit from my personal experience. I share a lot of the same problems that students have.
Right. Yeah.
I get it. The pronunciation is hard. I know that grammar is not always the rule. The rule, we don't always follow the rules. There's a lot of exceptions and words that are confusing, the
Yeah.
frustration, the embarrassment of being an adult and trying to communicate in another language. So I think that it's relatable and students appreciate that.
Yeah, I completely agree. And you know that my husband also teaches English as a second language. And I know that that's something that his students appreciate, is that he has been through the process of learning English, because English also is not his first language.
Yeah.
And that it helps the students to feel like they can trust you, right? And that you know what it is like to learn.
Yes, yes. It's, and I always share my little boo-boos, my little mistakes with them, things that I had to learn the hard way. And they appreciate that because and I think I also can be like a role model. Look, I worked hard, I studied hard, I put years into this, and I'm here now. Not that everybody wants that all my students will become English teachers, but they can be doctors, they can be anything that they decide to do, whatever their career choices. So yeah.
Yeah. And you mentioned about the culture, that you also had to learn the culture. Do you think that that is something that a lot of your students struggle with too? And are you able to kind of help them with understanding the cultural differences?
Absolutely, especially for the students that live within a community that speak the same language. They may not be exposed to a lot of the American culture, even though they're here. So many times we spend class time just talking about these cultural experience that we have. For example, Thanksgiving, right? I don't celebrate Thanksgiving, or I didn't when I was in Brazil, but now I do because my family is American. And but students don't celebrate that, but we still talk about these things because it's important to understand the language within the culture, within the society that you're inserted now. So yeah, it's very interesting. It's interesting to have these conversations and to observe things from a outsider perspective. So it's lovely. I love it. I love it.
That's so great. Yeah, I know your students love having you. Speaking of culture, are there some like cultural differences that you found to be particularly challenging after you came here? Can you think of anything off the top of your head?
Oh my gosh, I think there were so many. I think, oh, I don't know. Cultural food for me was a cultural shock. Some things that we don't eat in Brazil that we eat here, or we eat in a different way. For example, avocado. We don't eat avocado in Brazil in a salad, or on toast. So there are lots of things that I don't. And now I'm so used to the culture that it's hard for me to go back and think about all the little shocks that I had. But regarding clothing, how we're more conservative here, and in my country you can wear really short things and nobody's really judging you. So it took a while. It took a good while for me to get used to it. Another example is driving. I never had to drive in Brazil because public transportation was pretty good. When I moved here and living out in the country, I was alone. Everybody home they were at work. I was by myself. I didn't know how to drive. I didn't have a car. So that was a shock, a real shock for me to not be able to get up and go.
Yeah, cars are definitely like a requirement.
An American thing.
Right? Yeah. And yeah. Like it's hard for people to rely on public transportation here, because in a place like the city where we live, where it's very spread out, you really need to have a car to get around, and it's part of the American lifestyle, right?
Yeah, at least here in California for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, Angelini, tell us, what do you think about grammar? Do you think that knowledge of grammar is necessary for English learners?
Oh, absolutely. When I started learning English, it was mostly grammar. We had to do a lot of grammar exercises, and grammar is the foundation of any language, right? So like it or not, grammar is part of the language that we speak as our first language, our second, third language. Sometimes we're not even aware of that. So yes, grammar is important at any level. I think no matter if you're a beginner or an advanced student, I think you will always find new grammar points that you maybe you weren't aware before.
Mhm.
And you know, up to this day, I am learning new things, and I always try to improve my English. I always try to apply the new grammar point that I learned into my speaking, my writing. So yes, I think grammar is key.
Mhm.
Key to good writing, I think good reading, because if you don't understand the grammar
Yeah.
structure, you may not understand the message. You
Mhm.
may have enough vocabulary, but if you don't know how the words work together there, maybe you won't understand the message.
Mhm.
For speaking, you know, even when we're speaking, you need to know kind of how to structure your speech. And
Mhm.
that goes back to grammar.
Mhm.
When you're listening, especially like listening a lecture, you need to understand these grammar, the structure again of the language. That's
Mhm.
what it is. Grammar becomes less scary when we think of it as just being the foundation, the structure of a language.
Mhm.
Or like puzzle pieces, like I like to tell my students, let's work
Mhm.
with the puzzle pieces.
Uh-huh. So we're preparing our students to go to college or university in English. And one of the things that they need to be able to do is to write well in English. And so for example, like last week, we were talking about how to write a good title for an essay.
Mhm.
And one of the rules is that you don't capitalize prepositions and articles and conjunctions, right? So if you don't know what those things are,
Yeah.
suddenly you can't even understand a lot of the rules that we use for writing. And I feel like for people who think that they can learn a language by just sort of, so one thing I hear people saying sometimes is, well, babies don't learn language,
Yeah.
like they don't have to memorize grammar rules, like,
Mhm.
and we can just learn it that way, that we can just listen and then we can like sort of repeat things that we hear. But the problem is that we're not babies, right?
Exactly.
And the process of learning a language in when it's your second or third language is not the same as it is
Mhm.
when you're learning your native language as a baby or a child.
Yeah.
And I think that when people think that they can just like hear things and memorize them, they don't then have any control over what they do with those chunks of,
It will
right?
be very formulaic, I think, because you're going to be using
Right.
just those things that you memorized. You don't have the flexibility of playing with the language
Right.
and adjusting to the needs that it requires, whatever you need to express right now.
Right.
And I don't agree with learning like babies, because I mean, as you said, we're adults, right? And for people like me that came here as an adult, I had to find a job, I had to work, I had to other responsibilities. So it's not like a child that is just absorbing all of that information, right? We
Mhm.
have to absorb that information while we're running a million other things in our head, trying to do a million other things. So
Mhm.
it doesn't happen like children.
Mhm.
I wish it did. But I think back to the grammar question, if you have that foundation, if you have enough knowledge, you start just building the puzzle
Mhm.
with these other pieces and you plug in, right?
Mhm.
So then, yeah, maybe from listening, from picking up what's around you, that could potentially work. It did for me. You know, I
Mhm.
needed to have some structure, some foundation before I could build my little English house.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
Um, so yeah, little
Mhm.
by little, you add little things. Now we're gonna add a window, a flower here and there. That's what I tell students. It's just
Mhm.
like building a house.
Mhm. I like that analogy. That's great.
Yeah.
The aim of my channel is to help people learn academic English, right? So the English that we need to be able to go to school or get a good job. And so what do you think about, how is it different learning a language in your native country and learning English here in the US? Like the thing that our students are doing. A lot of our students learned English in their home country and then they came here, they immigrated, and now they're learning English here in the US. How are those things different?
I can only speak for my own experience in
Mhm.
Brazil that I had from 20 years ago. When I started learning English, I was already an adult. I was a young adult. And the English that I learned it was very basic, and the goal was more conversational English. Not that it's bad, but it's certainly not the academic English that we need to come here to the United States and watch a lecture, to be part of a lecture, to participate in a lecture, to write a paper. And also for me, it was hard because the classes were all in Portuguese. They were English classes, but offered in Portuguese. So we don't get this experience of listening all the time in English, understand all the materials in English. And it was okay at the time because I didn't need to come here and study here. But I think that if students are planning on coming to the United States, who are an English-speaking country, to study, they may want to find a program, a language school, because in many other countries, that's how it is. It's a language school, right? That offers English that is more college-oriented, more college preparation. At the time when I was taking English, there wasn't anything like that, or nothing like that around where I lived. And but I think nowadays there are, because when I worked at an English language institute at one of the universities here in California, a lot of the students that were coming from South Korea, from Japan, they were coming already to the United States with a pretty good foundation, good understanding what college was like. So yeah, I think it's important to, it depends on your goal, right? If your goal is to study abroad, then that's what your goal should be. You should look for programs like that. Conversation is important too, because how are you going to talk with your classmates and things like that? But that you kind of pick up as you go too. It's the academic preparation, I think, is a little bit harder because the language is more involved. The vocabulary, the academic vocabulary, you need to know when you're going to use academic words and when it's just speaking words, right? And that's something that I never learned when I was taking English classes in Brazil. If you're willing to spend a little bit more and invest in your future, then look for a program that offers academic preparation.
Yeah, that's a good point. You know, I had a student who she was from Vietnam, and she actually took a program in which she learned how to write an American style essay before she came here. And that actually ended up saving her a lot of time, because she got here and she was able to begin her studies at a much higher level and just get right into her major at the college. But yeah, you know, academic English it's interesting, because I think that it's a worthy goal, because even if you don't want to come here and study, it's nice because it opens up, you know, so many other things that you can do with English, right? That you can study things, or you can like watch, you know, TED Talks or other like higher level presentations of information. You can like read newspapers and read novels.
If you go to a job interview where you have to do some writing, you have to, you know, communicate at a more professional level or formal level, your academic English will help you to write these, whatever email, whatever you're doing for your work. So I think it is important to have. Certainly you can learn that when you get here. Sure, that's why we're here, right? We're here to teach these people. But if you have some knowledge, it's very helpful. It won't look so foreign to you. But the people that come prepared, they have a much easier time, and it shows. It shows on how they write. It shows on how they communicate. And even the study skills, that's something that we don't discuss much, but the study skills, knowing the expectations that you have to have when you're in college. Even that.
So, yeah, especially because in the US, the education focuses a lot on independence, right? That students need to have the ability to figure out what they need to learn from the class and then go home and have their own plan of how to study and learn at home.
Mhm.
And there's so much focus on students learning independently, right?
Yeah.
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 Mhm.
What the colleges here expect from students, we can't just memorize and regurgitate and
Right.
repeat everything.
Right.
Here we have to think critically about
Right.
things.
Yep.
And that's something that I notice, that sometimes students from other countries, they come in and they feel like they're like, oh, I know this, but they're
Mhm.
just repeating things
Mhm.
that they exactly verbatim
Mhm.
from what they read or what they heard. And here we're going to flag it as it's plagiarism. You know,
Mhm.
no, this is not your own words. We
Right.
want your own words. We want your
Right.
own ideas.
Right.
So even
Yeah.
that's something that nobody ever taught me,
Mhm.
but it would have been really nice to know.
Mhm. Right. That's one of the most challenging things is assignments like, read this article and then come to class and discuss it with two of your classmates for an hour.
Oh gosh, yes.
Right.
Oh,
And then go home and write a response in which you explain your own interpretation or your own opinions or your own thoughts
mhm.
about that. Those are
Or
the
read
kind of
different
assignments that are really
sources and synthesize all the information.
fun. Right. Right. Yeah, those are tough skills.
Yeah.
So what advice do you have for people who want to study English in the US?
I think the first thing is, so for example, in Brazil, we have language schools that focus on English, the British English,
Mhm.
and some other schools that focus on the American English.
Mhm.
Maybe you can pick one of those
Yes.
two camps,
Mhm.
because then you will, if you want to study here in the United States, then you will be already familiarized with a lot of
Mhm.
the culture, because the textbooks or whatever they use will
Mhm.
already introduce you to some of that. Also, these schools, they may have already a program that prepares you to go study abroad. They may have an exchange program uh, that facilitates that.
Mhm.
If people can spend the money and come for 3 months, do a study abroad, that is great.
Yeah.
That would be great, but not everybody can do that.
Mhm.
Um, And nowadays with the internet, oh my gosh, I wish I had the internet 20 years ago.
I know there's so much out there, isn't
Oh
there?
my gosh.
Uh-huh.
There are so many resources. There are blogs that tell you exactly what to expect. What kind of,
Mhm.
do you want to study at a university, a community college?
Mhm.
What do you want to do? Do you want to get an associate's degree? What is it? Do you want to get a bachelor's degree? Here we go. So there are resources there that explain exactly what it is. So be curious. Be
Uh-huh.
curious, motivated. If that's your goal, you have to go for it and
Mhm.
search. That's one of the best skills, I think, is the ability to research things.
Yeah, and while you're talking
Constant
about that, I was thinking
motivation.
about right. I was thinking about some of our students who come and sometimes they struggle for the first year or two,
Yeah.
right? Or even 3 years. There's a
Yeah.
lot of culture that they have to get used to. It's
Yeah.
hard because people here have a busy life, and so our students often have trouble making friends because
Yeah.
Americans are busy and so it's not easy, but usually
No.
after a while, I think they feel happy with the experience and they feel that they even get more motivation to keep working
I
at it.
think that's inevitable. That feeling of being lost in this new culture is
Mhm.
inevitable.
Mhm.
First, we have the honeymoon phase that everything looks so cool and so
Right,
different, but
right.
that fades away pretty quickly.
Mhm.
It took me a good 3 years
Mm.
to feel like I was finally inserted in this new culture and this new
Mhm.
society. Even though my family, everybody around me, they were all great at accommodating me, making me feel safe and loved.
Mhm.
But it's a big move. It's a big
Mhm.
move. It takes time. It's not going to happen right away. And going to college is a huge, huge move. But
Mhm.
going to college also, to me, the whole reason why I wanted to go to a community college is because I felt like I needed more.
Mhm.
Just my little bubble, the little world that I lived in with my family wasn't enough. I needed to be exposed to a lot more.
Mhm.
And the college did that for me.
Mhm.
It made me think it was possible to continue my education. It made it possible to get a different job.
Mhm.
So, and to understand how
Yeah.
culture around me works.
Mhm.
So it's scary, it's different, but
Mhm.
it's worth it. And you may make friends. I made some really good friends that really helped me in the process too.
Mhm.
Even though Americans are busy and the lifestyle is different, there is always someone there that's willing to help you out. So,
Right. Yeah, I agree with that.
and your professors, most of us want you to be successful, right?
Right.
And that's what I meant was most of the instructors that I had were wonderful, helpful people
Mhm.
that guided me in a path that I didn't even know was possible.
Mhm.
So, but you have to be open. You have to be open to accept this help, and you have to seek help.
Well, Angelini, thank you so much for sharing your very valuable experience and tips with us. And I hope to see you back on campus soon.
Yes.
And thank you again. I really appreciate it.
Oh, it was my pleasure. It's always fun to talk to you. And whenever people need some advice, I am more than happy to share my experience. And if I can help, that's what I'm here for. So
That's
thank you. Thank you for the opportunity to
Thank you. And
spread the word. All right.
take care. We'll see you soon.
Okay. Bye.